Good morning and welcome to the third meeting of the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee of 2026. Our first item on the agenda is just to consider our future work programme, agenda item 3 in private. Are we content? We are. Agenda item 2 is the consideration of continued petitions. And again, there may be many people joining us this morning who are monitoring the development and progress of their petition. At this stage in the Parliament, there is little option but for the committee to actively consider whether there's anything further we can do in this Parliament to progress the petition, and it may well be, irrespective of the merits of the issue of the petition, we feel at this stage we've got no option but to close the petition. And we will obviously identify to petitioners when that's the case that there is an option by so doing that for them to resubmit the petition at the beginning of the next session of Parliament if they think that's the appropriate course of action for them, but that would then allow the petition to be properly explored by the new Parliament. The first of our petitions this morning is petition number 1946, which is to call on the Scottish Government to pay all charges for homeless temporary accommodation lodged by Sean Anthony Clarkin. And it calls on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to use general taxation to pay for all charges for homeless temporary accommodation, including writing off the £33.3 million debt at the time of the petition owned by homeless people for temporary accommodation to local authorities. And we last considered this in June 25, where we agreed to write to the Minister for Housing. Now, the Cabinet Secretary for Housing provided a response to the committee, which highlights work being undertaken to better understand the costs, quality and value for money challenges around increasing the use of suitable temporary accommodation. And the submission also states that charges for temporary accommodation are a matter for individual councils, but councils must take into account what a person can afford to pay. The Cabinet Secretary's response notes that the Scottish Government is willing to work in partnership with others to increase consistency in monitoring, to improve transparency on charges and value for money. Colleagues, do we have any suggestions for action in relation to this petition? Mr Gold.
Thank you, Convener. I think more generally there's clearly an issue with homelessness that we would all want to be rectified. And I think more generally in terms of the petitions we're looking at today, I think it might be worth highlighting for anyone listening that if any committee member is articulating what the Scottish Government are stating, that is not an endorsement of that fact, or indeed it should be regarded as just a statement of fact rather than a position of agreement or otherwise. And with regard to that, I think on this petition, I think we should close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has stated that it has no plans to pay for homeless temporary accommodation or waive outstanding debts. Furthermore, the Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers does not think that there is any case for the Scottish Government to take on the cost of funding temporary accommodation or to write off existing arrears.
Well, fairly direct response from those two bodies. Do colleagues agree with the proposal from Mr Golden? We do. Petition number 2143 to introduce legislation to require all landlords to tackle damp and mould to specified standards, also lodged by Sean Anthony Clarkin, and this calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to introduce legislation to require all private and registered social landlords to investigate and remediate damp and mould within specified timeframes and to high-quality standards. Again, we considered this petition on the 4th of June last and agreed to write to the Scottish Government. And in its response, the Scottish Government reiterates its commitment to bring AWAB's law into force in Scotland in the rented sector from March 2026. Now, as recently as last week, the Government announced the introduction of the first set of relevant regulations, and subject to agreement by Parliament, the investigation and commencement of Repair Scotland Regulations 2026 will require landlords to investigate reports of damp and mould and to start repairs within a set timescale. The petitioner, however, remains concerned that requiring homes to only be substantially free from rising and penetrating damp doesn't actually go far enough, and he argues that a statutory framework should also define high standards for the remedial work undertaken by landlords in this area. Nonetheless, it does seem that the Scottish Government is making progress in this regard. Do colleagues have any suggestions for action? Mr Ewing?
Yes, as you've said, Convener, the Scottish Government has committed to essentially implementing the core provisions asked for by the petition from March this year onwards, and it has now announced the introduction of the first set of relevant regulations, and therefore it would appear the Scottish Government are committed to doing essentially what the petitioner has asked. I think we all know, and probably all have had, quite severe cases of helping constituents whose homes have been riddled with damp, and it's a ghastly situation for any individual to find themselves. So, I hope the petitioner will be satisfied that there is a successful outcome promised. It's not yet there, but in the light of the fact that it has been promised, I don't think there's really any more that we can do, and therefore would suggest that, in the light of all those circumstances, we close this petition.
Under Rule 15.7. Yeah.
Indeed, yes.
Are we content with that?
Yeah.
We are. Thank you. The next petition is Petition 1985 to evaluate garages to homes developments, lodged by Darren Loftus, calling on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to commission an independent evaluation and provide national guidance on garages to homes developments. We last considered this petition on the 6th of December 2023, where we agreed to consider the petition at a future meeting on the basis that the petitioner had at that point requested a deferral of consideration. The Scottish Government's submission to the committee states that planning applications are determined in accordance with the development plan for the area, unless material considerations indicate otherwise, and the submission sets out that planning and building standards, while separate regulatory regimes, involve robust processes, which means that whether in the Scottish borders or elsewhere, garages to homes developments will require planning permission. The submission states that it would not be appropriate for the Scottish Government to comment on any proposals that have come forward as planning applications to a council, or may not come forward in future, as this may prejudice the outcome of the decision-making process should the case then be notified to ministers. The Scottish Government does not consider that there are any national implications to the garages to homes proposal in the Scottish borders, and does not believe that a broader independent evaluation is required, because there are long-standing processes for assessing and adjudicating on proposals of this nature. Now, the petitioner's submission refutes the Scottish Government's view that there are no national implications to garages to homes in the borders. The petitioner states that he has evidence that the Scottish Borders Housing Association hope their feasibility and pilot could be rolled out nationally. The petitioner's view is that an evaluation is required of garages to homes developments, as planning and building standards regulatory regimes do not allow objections on the grounds of social impact. His view is that an evaluation is required to consider issues such as social inclusion, disability rights and the proximity of amenities. Do colleagues have any suggestions for action in the light of the Scottish Government's response? Mr Russell.
In light of the fact that the legislation is already in place regarding this kind of thing, is to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government does not believe that a broader independent evaluation of garages to homes developments is required due to the existing planning and building standards regulatory regimes are in place.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Are colleagues content to close the petition on that basis? We are. Petition number 2018 to recognise the value of swimming pools and provide financial relief to help keep pools open, lodged by Helen Plank on behalf of Scottish Swimming, and urges the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to help keep our swimming pools and leisure centres open. We last considered this petition on the 7th of May 2025, where we agreed to seek a chamber debate on the issues raised by this petition and to write to the Minister of Social Care, Mental Wellbeing and Sport. As colleagues, of course, will know, the chamber debate took place on Tuesday the 6th of January this year, our first sitting day of the year. And in opening the debate, I expressed my hope on behalf of the committee that the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care would engage both with the idea of establishing a national swimming pool task force and with the introduction of a statutory duty to have swimming as part of the school curricula, as advocated indicated by our witnesses in the evidence session last April. Now, it was encouraging to see right across the chamber so many colleagues echo our call for the establishment of a task force. The Cabinet Secretary seemed slightly less enthusiastic, although he did suggest that he would give this further consideration, and he indicated that Sports Scotland will continue to work with Scottish Swimming to explore the best options available to support and protect swimming pools. Following that, on the 13th of January, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government announced that the Scottish Government will offer free universal swimming lessons to primary school children as part of its Summer of Sport 2026. I have to say, consequently, in response to a question from myself, the Cabinet Secretary said it would only be for 1 year, but then subsequently issued a correction notice to the official record to indicate that, in fact, no, it would be a permanently available initiative, which I'm delighted to hear. We received submissions from Rachel Hamilton, MSP, and Beatrice Wishart, MSP, who highlight the impact of pool closures in their constituencies. We also have an additional submission from our petitioner who states that at the start of 2026, 7 pools were reported to be under threat of closure, and she states that the situation is likely to worsen. The petitioner therefore reiterates Scottish Swimming's call for a task force and additionally proposes that Scottish Swimming and Sports Scotland should be consulted on the closure of pools to help ensure their protection as community assets. Now, this does strike me as a petition we've done a lot of work on, has some progress with, that may be best served by a fresh petition in the next Parliament, updating the asks of the petition in the light of the initiatives of the Scottish Government to date, and just to watch to see what the consequence of that is. But I wonder if colleagues agree with that.
I wonder, I did listen to the debate. I think I was there. I remember you asking whether the swimming lessons would be every year, just a one-off, and I remember that exchange. So that was a palpable hit. But if the Scottish Government have promised to consider a working group, I just wonder whether it would be worthwhile writing to the Minister to ask whether that decision will be taken in this section of Parliament, and if so, what it will be. I'm not sure that that would prevent us from closing the petition, because I think we probably have gone as far as we can. But in doing so, I wonder whether it might be useful just to give the Minister a prod, because, you know, heaven forfend the thought that the Minister would just play for time, but perhaps that others might suggest that.
With his commitments, you mean, and the... OK. Are we content then? I mean, if we close the petition under Rule 15.7 on the basis the Scottish Government has committed to introducing a universal offer of swimming tuition, that Sports Scotland will continue to work with Scottish Swimming, that the Scottish Government's view is that it's for local authorities to decide how funds are best allocated, and that we've probably raised issues as far as we can in this Parliament. But in closing the petition, we will write to the Cabinet Secretary indicating that he did say in the course of his contribution to the debate that we led in Parliament that he was open to considering the idea of a task force. The committee remain very committed to this, and so do the petitioners and others in the chamber who expressed an interest in these matters, and it would be helpful to have some indication as to whether or not the Minister believes that's a consideration that might lead to an outcome in this Parliament, or whether it would be one for the next. Content? Yeah. And we thank Helen Plank and everybody who has contributed to what I think has been one of the really interesting petitions that we've considered in this Parliament. Certainly the attention we've been able to give to it has, I think, raised awareness of it. I think the issue remains still huge. I don't forget Duncan Scott saying to us, where are the next generation of Olympic swimmers going to come from if we don't have swimming pools for them to train in? And I hope, therefore, that one way or another, this issue continues to have the profile it deserves in the next Parliament. Petition number 2020 to provide fertility treatment to single women. This has been lodged by Anne-Marie Morrison, calling on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to provide the same fertility treatment to single women as is offered to couples in the NHS for the chance to have a family. Last considered on the 21st of May 25, we agreed to write to the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, and the response we received states that a National Fertility Group meeting, Public Health Scotland provided a recap on the demand modelling that had been completed earlier in the year and provided further information on capacity and cost modelling. It was subsequently agreed that the Scottish Government would consider commissioning Public Health Scotland to carry out capacity modelling for the expansion of IVF across criteria to include single people. Now, the submission states out that once this work is completed, the National Fertility Group would then need to schedule time to properly discuss the modelling implications and consider whether they would support a criteria change recommendation in the medium to longer term as an aspiration when health budgets could support the increase in funding this would require. The response states that these conversations are likely to take place in early 2026. Well, in the light of that response, do colleagues have any suggestions for action? Mr. Goldham.
Thank you, Convener. I think, unfortunately, because the aims of the petitioner haven't been acquiesced as yet, that the committee has no choice but to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the National Fertility Group is considering options for expanding NHS IVF's treatment for single people, so there is at least a possibility there. And beyond the National Fertility Group's work on IVF, the Scottish Government has not indicated that work to expand other fertility treatments to single people will take place.
So are we content to close the petition on that basis? And I would very much urge the petitioner perhaps to contact whoever our MSP is after the election with a view to pursuing the government in relation to inquiries over the National Fertility Group's working consideration. And if that doesn't lead to the progress that is hoped for, potentially to submit a fresh petition to the next Parliament. Petition number 2025 to improve the support available to victims of domestic violence who have been forced to flee their home, lodged by Bernadette Foley. It calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to improve the support available to victims of domestic violence who have been forced to flee the marital home by ensuring access to legal aid for divorce proceedings where domestic violence is a contributing factor, to ensuring victims are financially compensated for loss of the marital home, including loss of personal possessions and furniture left in the property, and ensuring that victims are consulted before any changes are made to non-harassment orders. Now, we last considered this on the 21st of May last year and agreed to write to the Minister for Victims and Community Safety. The response states that a series of immediate reform actions were to be implemented in 25-26, and the aim is to make it easier both for solicitors to work with legal aid funding and for users to access it. The Minister also indicates that the Government was undertaking research on legal aid fees in 2025 in order to begin developing a future legal assistance system. It was reiterated that, based on this work, relevant primary legislation would be brought forth in a future parliamentary session. Regarding non-harassment orders, the Minister highlights the Scottish Law Commission's Aspects of Family Law project, focusing on a review of the civil remedies available for domestic abuse, which include civil non-harassment orders, NHOs. At the time of the Minister's response, this review was underway. Now, we previously heard that when an NHO is made by a criminal court, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service proactively seeks the views of the victim when prosecutors make a decision about whether to oppose an application to revoke or vary the NHO. We've also received a submission from the petitioner with a number of additional questions which she thinks should be addressed. However, at the stage we're at in the Parliament now, with just 4 meetings ahead, do members have any comments or suggestions for actions in relation to progress that we think we might or might not be able to make now? Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Convener. I mean, first of all, from a personal point of view, I think the legal aid system is a farce, and with respect to this, I think it's quite disappointing, but nonetheless, I think the committee has no choice to today to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders on the basis that, firstly, the Scottish Government claims that they have made some short-term actions to improve access to legal aid. Perhaps this should be tested, and they have indicated that long-term work is ongoing to inform the development of legal aid reform legislation in a future parliamentary session. Again, I would welcome the petitioner resubmitting in the next session of Parliament to test this claim as well. Furthermore, the Scottish Law Commission is undertaking a review of civil remedies available for domestic abuse. Again, something that could be looked at in the next session. And finally, the policy of the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service is to proactively seek the views of the victim when prosecutors decide whether to oppose an application to revoke or vary a non-harassment order.
Okay. Are colleagues content on that basis? Yes, we are. And again, if there's a review underway, then there's an opportunity to pursue this and interrogate that review, I think, in the next Parliament. Petition number 2061 to require solicitors to ensure capacity of vulnerable individuals by having a medical professional co-sign legal documents. And this has been lodged by Laura Johnston-Brand, calling on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to help prevent coercion of vulnerable, frail and debilitated individuals by requiring solicitors to have a medical professional co-sign legal documents confirming the capacity of the individual. We last considered this petition on the 18th of June last, where we agreed to write to the Scottish Government. In its response, the Government states that following the 2024 consultation on proposed changes to the Adults with Incapacity AWI Scotland Act 2000, it concluded that additional time was required to ensure that any legislative proposals are robust, workable and deliver the best outcomes. For this reason, the proposed bill was no longer included in the May 2025 legislative programme. The Government has set up an expert working group to develop the policy and the operational considerations to support future legislative change in this area, with a minister-led oversight group also established to monitor and drive progress. Initial meetings were expected to take place in September 25. Evidence from the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges and Faculties in Scotland previously highlighted concerns that requiring a medical assessment in all instances where a potentially vulnerable person signs a legal document, rather than only in cases where there is concern about their mental capacity, may prove burdensome, time-consuming and potentially also more expensive for the individuals affected. Members may also remember that guidance by the Law Society of Scotland states that the solicitor should be satisfied when taking instructions from a client that the client has the capacity to give instructions in relation to that matter. The guidance further indicates that if there is any doubt as to a client's capacity to instruct in a particular case, solicitors should seek input from an appropriate qualified professional. Do colleagues have any suggestions for action? Mr. Ewing.
Yes, I would recommend that under 15.7 of Standing Orders we do close this petition on the basis that, firstly, it's already best practice for solicitors to obtain medical opinion if there are doubts about a person's capacity, that the evidence received by the committee suggests that mandating this practice in all cases could become time-consuming, costly and burdensome. And thirdly, that the Scottish Government suggests that additional time is required to develop workable legislative proposals to reform the Adults with Incapacity Act, and it set up a working group. And I think the Scottish Government did give that response in a request that was made, I think, by myself at the previous consideration of this petition, that there had been a proposal to include legislation, but that had been withdrawn, and to provide an explanation of why it was withdrawn. And I think they have, to be fair, have been fairly candid in the reply, stating that it's an area not without complexity, that there were a number of different problems identified and views expressed by the responses to a consultation which was undertaken, and they're not ready yet to provide legislation which is robust but also practical in terms of the practical implications of obtaining medical opinion in these circumstances. So I just wanted to add that, because the petitioner and those others who supported the petition of interest in this case will, I think, have done a good job in focusing attention on this issue, but it's plainly a very complex one. And just lastly, I do recall the petitioner's own circumstances where his father was taken advantage of by a solicitor who was, as a result, fined for misconduct. So obviously the petitioner's had a very, very bad experience, but sometimes hard cases can make bad law. So I think, I hope the petitioner recognises that, to be fair, the government is giving this serious consideration that it deserves, and I hope that the next Parliament session might consider it anew, because, not least, and there may be different views about this, but the assisted dying bill, if it comes in, I think may multiply some of the complexities of the issues.
Okay, thank you. And on that basis, then, we're proposing to close under Rule 15.7. I do actually recall the debate discussion we've previously had in the petition. I think it did raise important issues out of a difficult circumstance. And I think that the fact the government are reviewing this and obviously had to undertake further review does, I think, illustrate the complexity of the issues involved. Are we content to close the petition at this stage on that basis? We are. Thank you. Petition number 2062 to introduce a national screening programme for prostate cancer, lodged by Bill Alexander, calling on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to introduce a national screening programme for prostate cancer, last considered on the 27th of November 24, at which point we agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care and the UK National Screening Committee. The UK National Screening Committee opened a consultation on prostate cancer screening, which remains open until February 26. The consultation seeks feedback on a 25 modelling study and on a draft recommendation for action. The modelling study considered whole population screening and found that screening all men in the UK, regardless of their risk profile, may lead to a small reduction in the number of deaths from prostate cancer. But it would also result in substantial overdiagnosis. This means that many men would undergo treatment they do not need due to screening identifying a cancer that would not have caused symptoms of death. The study set out the whole population screening would be likely to do more harm than good. The UK National Screening Committee's draft recommendation is that population screening should not be recommended as a course of action. The Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care's response to the committee highlights the Detect Cancer Early campaign. The campaign aimed to reduce fear of cancer and empower those with possible symptoms to act early, in parallel to the campaign. A roadshow visited communities in Scotland to reinforce key messages with the key target audience. Colleagues, Douglas Ross subsequently was able to ask a question of the First Minister in relation to the decision on prostate cancer screening, and as we know, there has been a very high-profile campaign led by figures like Sir Chris Hoy and the former Prime Minister David Cameron, amongst others, in relation to the potential benefit of screening. And the First Minister said he was open, I think, to further considering this issue. And I wonder, therefore, if the committee would be content for us to write to the First Minister following the exchange he had with Douglas Ross in the Chamber, to say that the committee would be interested to hear what further consideration has been given to all of this, given the high-profile campaign that has been led by many significant people in Scotland and the ongoing concern that this is one of the key men's health issues that remains unresolved, but with a potential ability for early diagnosis, which can, frankly, save lives. And in that light, potentially adding this to the list of petitions we might consider holding open. Do colleagues have any thoughts?
Agreed. Bear in mind that prostate cancer is one of the biggest killers of men, so I think, yeah, it deserves more consideration.
So can we write to the First Minister following that exchange with Douglas Ross and add that potentially to the list of petitions we might consider, the small list of half a dozen or so that might be bequeathed to our successor committee? Petition number 2107, use more money recovered from the proceeds of crime to support community-based charities that train animals to assist in the detection of drugs lodged by Kevin Cragans on behalf of the Shetland Times Limited, and it calls on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to direct more public funding recovered through the Proceeds of Crime Act to support charities such as Dogs Against Drugs, which are vital to their communities and play an integral part in the seizure of drugs and criminal assets. I think we considered at some length in the earlier consideration of the petition, which took place on the 18th of June last year. We then agreed to write to the Scottish Government because we wanted to get some clarity on the specific work done to improve grant-making practices. The Government explains that it established a dedicated grants capability and assurance team at the end of 2023, which has since created a grant improvement group bringing together key stakeholders across the Government to coordinate improvements in grant policy and operations. The Scottish Government further explains that its Fairer Funding pilot provides 2-year funding to third sector organisations, and it has prioritised those which deliver frontline services and tackle child poverty. The pilot is expected to run until 2027, and the Government commits to the delivery of an interim assessment by May 2026 in order to identify the pilot's impact and potentially build the case for further multi-year funding arrangements, none of which seems to me to be terribly helpful to the Dogs Against Drugs Proceeds of Crime Act funding. But I wonder what colleagues think of that. Mr. Golden.
Well, I've got to say I'm cheering on this petition, and so are all the beagles and bloodhounds and labs and shepherds and terriers and Springer Spaniels who would ultimately receive, I think the old adage, reap what you sow, and it feels like some of these excellent companions are not receiving the value that they are clearly putting into society. However, given where we are in this session, and despite my personal views, I think the committee at this stage has to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that, firstly, the current priority of the Scottish Government of the Fairer Funding pilot is to provide funding to third sector organisations which focus on frontline services and child poverty. I think potentially this could be expanded as the petitioner suggests. Furthermore, the Scottish Government intends to deliver an interim assessment of the pilot by May 2026 in order to potentially build the case for further multi-year funding arrangements. And as a result of that, I think if there's going to be any progress in this particular area, I think it has to be in the next session with a new petition.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Fergus Ewing?
Well, I have to say Mr Goldman has been pursuing this issue doggedly, a bit like a bloodhound, if I may say so, and a comprehensive list of the various types of dogs involved. But seriously, the petition is an interesting one because it asks for money for a very worthy cause, namely to support the use of sniffer dogs in tracing drugs. And I mean, I do recall from my own experience in the mountain rescue team that one dog trying to trace a missing person was about 20-30 times more effective than humans because of their sense of smell and their swiftness. And they have a tremendous ability to do this. And irrespective of where the money comes from, it would seem to be something that is an extremely effective way to recover illicit drugs and cash, as well as the petitioner, who's from the Shetland Times, Mr Kevin Cragans, said, and as Beatrice Wishart, I recall, argued enthusiastically on the 18th of June. So, in closing the petition, because I don't think we can take it any further, I wonder whether we might write to the government to say that, irrespective of how funding is found for this purpose, whether this means from the proceeds of crime, which has a certain symmetry about it, or other means, that it's a very worthy cause, and whether they are going to do anything about it at all. Because I did think the reply was sort of studiedly evasive and unhelpful. Unnecessarily so, since it seems to be such an obviously good idea and effective practice that it's surprising it hasn't been, to use that ugly phrase, rolled out beyond Shetland. southward.
Yes. I mean, I think the response was almost as if we were asking for free lawnmowers or something to cut grass somewhere. I thought the response kind of fell well short of the importance of the issue underpinning it, and that it deserved slightly more direct attention. I'm quite happy that we write to the government, although we'll no doubt be accused of making funding requests of the budget without identifying sources. But we are identifying a source in this instance because we're saying the proceeds of the drugs themselves should actually be directed into the charity. Therefore, I also note that the Scottish Government says that it intends to have an assessment by May of this year. So I think not only might we write to the government saying, you know, we've closed this petition, but frankly, we did think the response was a bit short and that the issue deserves greater merit and attention. But that also say to the petitioner, in the light of the fact that there's to be an assessment by May 2026, there would be an opportunity for the committee in the next Parliament to consider a fresh petition on the basis of the outcome of that review and to try and pursue the fund more directly at that time. Are we agreed? Petition number 2139, the automatic expulsion for children charged with committing a crime against another child, lodged by Maria Giordano, calling on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to introduce automatic expulsion for children charged on suspicion of committing a crime against another child. And we last considered this petition on the 23rd of April last, when we agreed to write to COSLA, Connect, the Children and Young People's Commission of Scotland, together Scottish Alliance for Children's Rights and the Scottish Youth Parliament. Connect's response to the committee states that it does not feel qualified to comment on the petition in detail. Connect notes that parent views are not homogeneous and therefore there will be many different opinions on this challenging subject. COSLA's response to the petition highlights the national approach, getting it right for every child, and notes that it is rooted in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The response acknowledges that the scenario set out by the petition is an example of the complexities that arise when the rights of different children can be in conflict. COSLA states that these circumstances demand a considered, thoughtful, skilled and multi-agency response in order to navigate a way forward. COSLA's response notes that the petition calls for a sanction to be applied to a child before any due process in terms of the judicial system has taken place. The submission states that COSLA agrees with the position articulated by the Scottish Government that employing a policy of automatic exclusion without considering the individual circumstances of each case would not be helpful. I just want to check with the clerks. Did we receive a response from the Young People's Commissioner, Scotland? No. Well, can I just say I think that's unacceptable. The Young People's Commission of Scotland, the commissioners are a very expensive additional level of government that this Parliament is required to fund. And I actually think that they ought to have the courtesy, when requested to make a submission in response to a petition, to do so. And so I would like to write to the Young People's Commission of Scotland expressing the dissatisfaction of the Parliament that a body funded by the Parliament was unable to obtain a response on an important issue of public policy. Do colleagues have any suggestions, notwithstanding that, for action? Mr Ewing?
Well, I think, again, in view of the limited time available to us in this session, and substantially because of that, really, we should close the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders, and would suggest that we do so because the Scottish Government's position is that it would not be lawful to employ a policy of automatic exclusion without considering the individual circumstances of each case. It's got no plans to change the law on exclusions, and the committee has undertaken detailed work on broader issues relating to violence amongst young people, and that is their position. So plainly, nothing is going to change between now and April the 8th. That's I think, a matter of fact. And in saying that, as Mr Golden said earlier, I'm not supporting their view. And indeed, I'm bound to reflect that the individual circumstances to which our attention was drawn in this case was that there were in the same class a person accused of rape and the alleged victim And if that's the case, I think anybody can understand it's an extremely difficult circumstance. And I did think that Cosler's response, I mean, it was very, very general. The issue raised by the petitioner was very specific, and it's difficult to generalise from a specific case. But I don't really think that the petitioner's case has been answered properly by Cosler or anybody else, or the Scottish Government. And it's a very, very difficult area indeed. I don't pretend that I've got a magic solution, but I don't think it's going to go away. And the violence in the classroom is an issue that's rarely not raised in the chamber for very long. It's raised very frequently. So you know, I think in closing.
Well, would you prefer that we left this one as one that we might consider on our short list to be carried forward?
Well, I think there is a case for doing that. It's up to the whole committee, but I just feel the response is, if I were the petitioner and the circumstances described, as I've alluded to briefly, I would be very unhappy at this response. Indeed, it's almost like a moral lecture that, you know, you haven't got the right attitudes because of the United Nations approach and GIRFEC. Well, the United Nations is a hell of a long way from the classrooms we're talking about here. So, you know, it's a very difficult, I want to stress, a very difficult area indeed when dealing with children. But nonetheless, it's an issue of growing concern, I think, around the country to parents, to children and to everybody, frankly.
What are the thoughts of the committee? I have to say I don't really feel that we've been given much. I mean, the trouble is, I think but for the fact Parliament was about to conclude this is a petition where we may have thought we would take evidence actually to advance it. So, I mean, there is an argument, I think, for putting it to the short list of petitions we might consider holding open.
Yeah.
Are we content to do that? We'll hold the petition open at the moment and see whether or not we think that's one that we would recommend leaving open for the successor committee to take forward. I don't think the aims of the petition will have become obsolete or anything in the interim, so I would have thought, since we might have been inclined to take evidence, it's possible a successor committee might very much wish to do so as well.
I thought the Scottish Government's first argument that it would not be lawful to have an automatic exclusion because they need to consider every case, that's fair enough. No doubt that is true. It's almost certainly true legally. However, I mean, the reframing of the aim could be that there should be a presumption that this would be appropriate where there were extreme circumstances such as the one that I mentioned. For example, that would not, I don't think, risk breaching the law. But I'm thinking out loud here.
That would be an argument that could be tested in evidence as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we have an option. Which do we prefer to do?
Hold it open.
Yeah. We'll hold it open. Okay, we'll add that to the short list of ones we'd like to consider. Petition number 2141 to support the neurodiverse community by providing funding for psychoeducation. This petition has been lodged by Lewis Robertson and calls on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to improve the support available to the neurodiverse community by providing fully funded psychoeducation and sensory aids which allow for greater community integration pre- and post-diagnosis. We last considered this petition on the 21st of May last, when we agreed to write to the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government states that it does not currently have any plans to use existing frameworks to subsidise or distribute sensory aids. The response we received points to a number of established funding frameworks which can be used by existing providers of either psychoeducation or sensory aids to deliver these products and services. The Government illustrates this with a project run by Home Start Caithness, which used part of its funding to provide sensory aids for autistic parents for use during childbirth. Additionally, the Government states that health boards and local authorities can choose to invest in services which integrate the provision of sensory aids with services of psychoeducation delivered by neurodivergent individuals, should this be considered to meet the needs of their service users. Do the members have any comments or suggestions for action? Mr. Golden?
Thank you, Convener. Very sympathetic to the aims of this petition, but ultimately, as you, Convener, have highlighted, I think the committee has no choice but to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that primarily the Scottish Government does not plan to specifically subsidise or distribute sensory aids. Furthermore, the Scottish Government has indicated that existing funding frameworks can be and have been used by existing providers of psychoeducation and sensory aids to deliver these services. And finally, local authorities and health boards may additionally choose to fund relevant services based on user needs and, in addition to that, based on their available budgets, which I think is a critical point in all of this.
Thank you, Mr Golden. In the circumstances, are members content to agree? We are. Petition number 2148 to improve child and adolescent mental health services to adult mental health services transition, lodged by Heather Stitt. The petition calls on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to improve the transition from CAMS to adult mental health services by ensuring national referral guidelines and criteria are adhered to. We last considered this petition on the 21st of May, when we agreed to write to the Minister for Social Care, Mental Wellbeing and Sport. The Minister's response highlights the transition care plan templates, guidance and protocols which were developed alongside CAMS and the Scottish Youth Parliament. The plan was developed in collaboration between volunteers and members of the Scottish Youth Parliament. MSYPs, as part of a mental health steering group, worked with NHS chief executives and chief officers of integrated joint boards to seek to ensure that they were aware of the transition protocols and using them in the manner intended. The submission states that initial feedback from NHS boards on the implementation of the plans in 2019 noted that they were being implemented to varying degrees. There was also feedback that the documents were easy to use and allowed for a clear central contact for the young people during their transition. The Minister states that he will write to all boards to ask that they continue to review their work in this area and identify areas of improvement to support local needs. Do colleagues have any suggestions for action? Mr Russell?
To close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that CAMS, the Scottish Youth Parliament and the Scottish Government work to develop transitional care plan templates, guidance and protocols to support young people's transition to adult mental health services. The Minister committed to writing to health boards asking that they continue to review the work in this area and identify areas of improvement to support local needs. The committee is limited in time remaining to progress this issue in raised petition.
Colleagues, in the light of the Government's response, its commitment to write to health boards and the chances of us being able to advance the petition in the lifetime that we have left in this Parliament, are we content to support Mr Russell's recommendation? We are. Petition number 2155, lodged by Daniel Taggart. This is to improve support for people trying to give up e-cigarettes and vaping, and calls on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to improve that support by expanding access to nicotine replacement therapy and stop smoking medications to include e-cigarette users and vapers. We last considered this petition on the 18th of June 2025, when we agreed to write to the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health. We wanted to get a bit more clarity on what steps the Scottish Government was taking to increase support, as well as awareness of support for those trying to quit e-cigarettes and vapes, with a particular focus on young people. The Minister's response points to the Tobacco and Vaping Framework of 2023, via which the Government is committed to improving information around vapes and to increase awareness of avenues for support in stopping vaping or smoking. The Minister highlights a number of actions either already taken or to be taken over the next 2 years, though these are mostly focused on the prevention rather than increasing support for those already using e-cigarettes and vapes. Colleagues, do we have any suggestions for action? Mr Russell.
Just this is a comment here that these vapes, you know, the amount of young people that are actually using them, you know, you walk by a school or anything, you know, it's widespread. And part of the problem is I've got all these lovely flavours, strawberry. You know, you walk by somebody, so that's quite nice, you know, like the strawberry, vanilla, you name it, all the kind of lovely flavours in the world. And that's part of the problem for these, you know, to get them on to start with. Getting them off is going to be a much harder. Once they're on it, you need to get to the root problem first. You know, just a passing comment here.
I've been on this committee long enough in different parliaments to remember, of course, the advent of vapes, which were considered positively at the time as a route to get people off hard tobacco, which I think was quite a successful initiative, and very much so. I don't think necessarily anybody quite saw the massive growth in vapes per se as an attraction in their own right, as opposed to a device to get people off hard tobacco. And of course, as you say, they've become incredibly prevalent now, with a whole assortment of flavours. I mean, I've occasionally asked people what that was, and it's mango, passion fruit, and goodness knows what else that's going on. And more flavours than there are ice creams, I think, nowadays with vapes. But I'm not quite sure where we take things. Mr. Goldham?
I think that, as colleagues have suggested, vaping more generally, including what the petitioner suggests, is now a major crisis facing not just Scotland but the UK. I think that, as the convener suggests, they were initially brought in as a cessation tool and have subsequently changed the next generation growing up, where in many schools in Scotland there'll be vaping toilets, where it's commonplace and seen as no risk. And I think the wider implications around access to vapes, particularly for under 18s, the flavours, whether it's unicorn flavour or otherwise, which I presume isn't targeted at over 18s, I think there's lots of work for the next Committee of Parliament in this area, including what the petitioner suggests to look at, because there's, if you like, two categories of actions around this. One is cessation tools around tobacco to vapes, vapes to nicotine-based products, whether that be patches or otherwise, and I think it probably needs to be looked at in the round if a petition comes this way. I think there is potential for this committee to keep this open, but my preference would be if a new petition came in to allow the new committee to look at the wider issue on this rather than just the specifics in this petition, and therefore I think the committee should close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that colleagues have highlighted, and indeed that current NHS guidance states that users of nicotine-based products should be able to access licensed smoking cessation products, and users of non-nicotine e-cigarettes and vapes can be referred to non-pharmacy specialist smoking cessation services. I think the reality is I would be shocked if many of the children currently using vapes in the schools across Scotland will be accessing said services.
Thank you. And of course, it could also be something for the Health Committee of the next Parliament to look at, because it definitely is one of those issues that has literally grown up in the lifetime of the Scottish Parliament. And I don't think there has necessarily been a proper holistic view of the issue. Or even I am not in a position to say what harms there are in relation to vaping in the way that there were to wider tobacco products, if any. So, I mean, I don't want to presume anything other than that it is the case that there is a very, very widespread prevalence of them now in public amongst young people. Do our colleagues content with Mr. Golden's suggestion that we close the petition? We are. And that concludes the public part of our meeting today. We will next meet on the 11th of February.